Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. We begin on the subject of George Clooney, who is busy trying to look 30 years younger than he actually is with weirdly dyed jet black hair, trying his hand on Broadway. He's starring in a play about Edward R. Murrow because Clooney fancies himself a journalist, you see, and has lots of thoughts on how journalists need to do journalism. Like he does it, mainly. You know, like stumbling upon the biggest story of the decade, that a sitting president is mentally infirm and ought to be 25th Amendmented right out of office, and then burying it, saying absolutely nothing for weeks on end. And then only after that president humiliates himself on the national stage at a presidential debate and then refuses to step down as the entire Democrat Party watches its electoral chances up and down the ticket go swirling down the toilet, finally decides to write an op-ed in the New York Times saying Joe Biden is not up for the job. That's not journalism, George. It's cowardice, followed by naked partisanship. You're not fooling anyone. So now he's starring in this Broadway show. By the way, what's the matter, George? Are the Hollywood roles getting a little hard to come by as you age and get decidedly more smug and self-congratulatory? I'm just asking. And chooses to finish this show by lecturing the audience on how journalism ought to be done. Speaking as Edward R. Murrow, he warns about the ongoing struggle for truth and integrity in the media. Truth and integrity. About the potential for the media to be manipulated and used for propaganda. Apparently, he ends the whole thing with a video montage featuring, as the show closes, yours truly and Elon Musk doing a, quote, Nazi salute. Okay. Because Elon Musk and I are the dangers George Clooney fears. Not the propaganda that was pushed on us for 4 years by his favorite leftist so-called journalists, that President Biden was fine, that these were all cheap fakes we were seeing, or for the 4 years before that, that President Trump was a Russian asset, but propaganda that would dare to defend anything done by Donald Trump. That's all propaganda, you see. Any defense of Trump is the dangerous propaganda of which he speaks. That's a violation of truth and integrity in media. By the way, one of Clooney's favorite news anchors, not for nothing, is Chris Wallace, who shut down any discussion of Hunter Biden's ties to Ukraine or China at a presidential debate as entirely irrelevant and off limits. That's his fave. So our pal Georgie got wind of the fact that this show mocked him for trying to lecture anyone on journalism, especially given the timeline on his own disclosures about Mr. Biden. Refresher. He hosted a fundraiser for Biden on June 15th, in which Mr. Biden could barely walk or talk. His appearance was so alarming that it was in the news for 2 weeks after, as it was clear he had to be escorted off stage by Barack Obama. Remember? A debate was raging in the news right then about whether Mr. Biden was fit to be president, never mind for a second term. And Clooney said nothing, absolutely nothing. Then came the disastrous presidential debate on June 23rd, and as calls grew steadily louder for Joe Biden to drop out, but he refused, that's when Clooney finally came out with an op-ed on July 10th, admitting to some of what he had seen a month earlier. He only spoke up when he saw the Democrats' electoral prospects swirling down the drain. But now he wants full credit for speaking truth to power and is even lecturing other Democrats for not doing their part. You know, some in my party weren't telling the truth, he said in an interview. In any event, I guess we hurt his thin-skinned Hollywood feelings here on the show because these big stars, they're not very good at taking criticism, you see. They're surrounded by yes men, managers, agents, PR folks who tell them that their every idea is brilliant, every thought a treasure. Nothing but profundity coming out of George Clooney's mouth. Maybe that'll give me an invitation to one of his swanky Hollywood parties. So he and Broadway's biggest and oldest bully, Patti Lupone, remember when she screamed at a ticket-holding audience member for not wearing a mask? Watch.
Put your mask over your nose. That's why you're in the theater. That is the rule. If you don't want to follow the rule, get the fuck out! Who do you think you are if you do not respect the people that are sitting around you? You pay your salary. bullshit. Chris Harper pays my salary. Who do you think you are? Just put your mask over your nose.
She's an angry woman, very angry, like so many leftist women. So she and George get together and they start navel gazing on stage about themselves, of course, and their vaunted profession and how bad, how just terrible the media is, and had the following exchange.
What we do in this is we talk about the responsibility of journalists to hold truth to power, right? That's our goal. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing that, and we don't tell people what to think when we show that montage at the end, for instance. You see Megyn Kelly, she's who's come out and said, I'm not a journalist. I didn't say I was a journalist.
Neither is she, by the way. Anyway.
But I'm not quite sure what she's done. I've at least been to, Darfur and Sudan and the Congo and been shot at and to try to get stories out. And I'm not quite sure what she has done to be a journalist. Having said that, we only show her words in this play. We don't tell people what to think. It's not out of context. We don't manipulate it. We literally just go, these are your words.
He actually thinks I'm objecting to something he put on his show about me. I have no idea what you put on your show about me. I couldn't care less, sir. I was mocking you for trying to lecture journalists on how to do journalism based on your own failure to speak truth to power. That's what you failed. You only did it when you knew your candidate was going to cost you up and down the ballot. And so Mr. Clooney is not quite sure what yours truly has done to be a journalist, which surprised me not at all. Not at all. Why would he know anything about the journalism career I have had? Absolutely none of my stories held any interest for George Clooney. Of that, I have no doubt. You see, I've spent the past 20 years interviewing people like Suzette Kelo, who owned the little pink house that got seized by her local government, declaring government domain, a decision that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, like the cake baker in Colorado, who didn't want to bake a gay wedding cake because it violated his religious beliefs. Oh, and by the way, also the gay couple he offended. People like triple and quadruple amputees back from Iraq and Afghanistan, who the Hollywood class looked down upon, actually loathed, judged, and treated like scum because they didn't like those wars. Not like the Ukraine war. No, not at all. What did you do to help the hundreds of men I featured on my Fox News show year after year, George, to help find housing and help for them, to help them rehabilitate their lives? I didn't see you. I see you went to Darfur. That's great. What about our guys? Because I never saw you at a Tunnel to Towers fundraiser, at a gathering for our Navy SEALs, and I've been to many of them. I never saw you at any of the public appearances that I've attended where our injured soldiers are just back from war, seeking a helping hand. I guess you never saw the interviews I've done of the Medal of Honors winners. They weren't very interesting to you, like Dakota Maher. You didn't want to hear his story about the overwhelming sacrifice he made for this country, both on the battlefield and then back home, where had it not been for a guardian angel looking over him, he would have taken that gun, it would have had bullets in it, and he would have taken his life in a truck one day. Did you miss that one, George? You didn't make that story into a movie, did you? No, it's been mostly Mark Wahlberg who shows any interest in our troops. I guess you never saw my interview with detransitioner Chloe Cole on what the gender cult has done to our young girls, or with Peyton McNabb after she suffered permanent nerve damage from a trans volleyball player. Or with Patriot Barbie, a.k.a. Lindsey Graham, who explained to our audience how the draconian lockdowns and intentional ruination of her business in Oregon during COVID led to her finding herself at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. No, you had no interest in stories like that actually probed the minds of regular Americans and found out why they did the things you only had an urge to demonize in your elite Hollywood circles. That's not the kind of fearless journalism you're talking about. I could go on, George. The school and mass shootings I've had to cover with tear-stained faces all around me, the women who told me their stories of domestic abuse or sexual assault or rape, the women who accused Trump, George, you should have liked that one, and those who accused Joe Biden too. Wonder if you saw that one. It also got buried by your favorite media stars. I guess these stories never made it on your radar. You were too busy in your $100 million Lake Como mansion or at one of your 5 other homes, running about the stage, pretending to be a journalist who speaks truth to power. Now, you tell us in that soundbite you even got shot at one time. And even that turns out to be a lie, consistent with your others. You've told the story many times. You need to be more careful if you're going to lie like this on camera. You once had a gun pulled on you by a kid in Darfur more than 20 years ago, only now with Patty Lupone, who you accurately deduce is a moron who will never check. Did you change it to you actually got shot at? That didn't happen. George, this is not the kind of truth and integrity we want in our profession. So no, it's no surprise that Clooney has not seen much of my work, not my 6 presidential debates, not my sit-downs with Trump, Putin, Modi, Netanyahu. His world is the world of entertainment and cosplaying human rights advocate on the arm of his wife. You know, the one who followed the professional wrestler he used to date. Maybe in the next decade, he'll catch a show or two and catch on to the kind of journalism that has made this show consistently one of, if not the, top news shows in the country. Over 2 billion views and news some call relentlessly factual. George. Joining me today, Rich Lowry and Michael Brendan Dougherty of National Review. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. Tariff wars, stubborn inflation, no wonder gold has been routinely hitting all-time highs. In volatile markets like the one we have now, don't sit on the sidelines with your head in the sand. You can take control and safeguard your savings. That's why so many Americans today are turning to Birch Gold Group. They have helped tens of thousands convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. Is it time for you to hedge against economic instability with gold? To learn how to own physical gold in a tax-sheltered account, text MK to 989898. Birch Gold will send you a free, no-obligation info kit. Again, just text MK to the number 989898. With an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews, Birch Gold has helped many protect their savings with gold. It took us decades to get into the tangled mess they're trying to unpack now in D.C. How long will it take to get us out? And at what cost? Text MK to 989898 today. Guys, great to see you. Welcome back. And is it any surprise? Is it any surprise to you, Rich Lowry, that George Clooney has, quote, no idea what I've done to call myself a journalist?
No, of course not. Classic Hollywood phenomenon. He plays someone in a movie or writes a movie about someone and then thinks he has great insight to what that is. And maybe is kind of one himself. Clearly he says, I'm not a journalist, but then he said he did this journalistic thing, exposing the truth.
He's been in Darfur.
Yeah, so good for him for his activism there. But look, he lied at the very least by omission about Joe Biden, right? He hosts this fundraiser in Hollywood. Everyone sees what's happening. Everyone sees him freeze on stage. Everyone knows he is debilitated to some extent or other, and no one says anything. And when all of us pointed out who watched it with our own eyes, they said we were making it up. I don't know whether Clooney actually said we were making it up, but he certainly was fine with everyone saying that we made it up. And then the debate happens. They can't deny it anymore. Then he comes out with his op-ed. Everyone knew, he was not the same man that we had seen before. So for him to lecture anyone, even someone who doesn't have your journalistic record on what fact telling the truth is, and even if it hurts, and what being factual is a complete travesty.
Yeah. That's the thing, MBD, is you know as well as I do that George Clooney probably consumes news mostly on MSNBC. The reason he liked Chris Wallace is because Chris started to openly lean much more leftward in his interviews, etc. And he doesn't have any interest, George Clooney, in the Suzette Kilos of the world. He has zero desire to find out what the COVID lockdowns did to regular Americans and what might have driven somebody to show up at the Capitol on J6, right? Like, those stories are beneath George Clooney, as does he feel the rest of us are.
Yeah, and I worry that there's no core of real conviction with George Clooney. I mean, his first major kind of political statement as an artist was a movie, Three Kings, that criticized George H.W. Bush for not finishing the job in Iraq and carrying on an invasion all the way to Baghdad. Years later, of course, when it was no longer in Democrats' partisan interest to make an argument like that, he abandoned it like a cheap date. So, like, again, there has just been a theme of raw partisanship, but dressed up as higher principle. And it just doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. And why would it? Again, like, we shouldn't necessarily be looking to Hollywood for any kind of guidance in politics.
And what's amazing to me is that if he's going to take the time to lecture American journalists on how to do their job, that now's the time he chooses to do it, right, Rich? Like now, once again, democracy dies in darkness. That crew's back.
Yeah, right.
They went totally silent during the 4 years of Joe Biden. And it's not like he didn't do things to excess. It's not like he didn't ignore our laws. It's not like he didn't, open the southern border, all those things. He had absolutely no interest in lecturing the press on how to do their job, even though they went totally silent during those years. It's only now that Trump's back in office that he feels the need to remind us of our responsibility to truth and integrity.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are shrouded in darkness. One, the president's condition, which we talked about. We're still learning more about what people on the inside knew and saw and did, by the day. The border, again, these were things that were out in the open. So the operation to hide them did not succeed because people could see with their own eyes. But they didn't acknowledge that, again, until late in 2024, the middle of 2024, they finally realized, this is going to get Donald Trump elected. We at least should try to do something about it. And then just the insanity of the trans stuff. And there's some cracks there. They're just cracks, right? It seems it's brave in the Democratic context for Gavin Newsom to say, there's a fairness issue for if a male plays in a female sport. But they tried to hide all that. They tried to gaslight us all on that. They said we were hateful, retrograde, purveyors of disinformation, all the rest. But the public could see the truth, which was a big reason that Donald Trump won last November.
Like most of these Hollywood people, MBD, he doesn't have a grip on the facts, and he hasn't, but he's spoken out about many news stories in an effort to sway public opinion. And probably the one that comes to mind next after Biden was the Breonna Taylor case down in Kentucky, where he's from. So he came out after these officers executed a so-called no-knock warrant, though they did knock, and they went into the facility, this apartment. And this woman, Breonna Taylor, was shot and killed as they had a shootout with her boyfriend, who was in the hallway and shot first at cops. Her boyfriend shot first at cops, who had announced themselves in any event. He spoke out about it and said her name was Breonna Taylor, and she was shot to death in her bed by 3 white police officers, which wasn't true. Breonna Taylor was not asleep in her bed. She got up too and came out in the hallway and was standing next to her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, as the officers announced their presence, knocked 6 times, and then resorted to a forced entry. This guy Walker admitted that he fired the first shot, and he hit. He hit an officer in the femur. The guy almost bled to death. Her ex-boyfriend was up to his neck in drug deals, and she was seen on tape with this guy going to retrieve packages with him, going to a trap house and so on. The media wants you to believe she was squeaky clean. George Clooney wanted us to believe she had absolutely no connection to anyone or anything nefarious, and that while she was asleep, completely innocent in her bed, 3 white cops just executed her because she's black. That was the implication, very clear. He was wrong on the facts, he was wrong on the implications, but that's what the Hollywood knee-jerk reaction is to news like that. And this guy now feels the need to lecture us about truth and integrity in reporting the facts.
Right. And remember, this is a guy who jumped on the story because he's from Kentucky. When was the last time he was in Kentucky? This is a man who spends his time on Lake Como and in Los Angeles. And while he was in Lake Como and Los Angeles, there was a huge news story that he could have shown some light on about Harvey Weinstein. Where was George? Well, he says, we knew Harvey liked girls, but we didn't know anything wrong was happening. Well, what? What was that? I mean, at least, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck made a penitent film, set in the Middle Ages about sexual assault. George Clooney just sidestepped the whole thing as if he didn't know anything about Harvey Weinstein or about the casting couch culture in Hollywood. And that's a story he actually could have shown some light on. And yet he goes on, the Academy Awards and congratulates himself and Hollywood for, quote, being out of touch with the rest of the country and being ahead of things like, civil rights or gay rights, etc. It just, there's no real record of substance there from him where it would have counted. It's just he has, he is a filmmaker. He has a taste for story. And so the narrative of what, he thinks should have happened in Kentucky fills his mind. And then he knows better than the cops what the standard operating procedure should be. I mean, it's a joke.
Right. Without doing any, homework to look into it. Of course, the subject of Kentucky came up with this loudmouth Patty Lupone, and he had to mention the Confederate flags. Like, that's the first thing that came to his mind in discussing his home state is the Confederate flags that he sees when he goes back to visit his parents in Kentucky. Nice. Because that's what Kentucky's all about. When you think Kentucky, you think Confederate flag and the Confederacy. I mean, that's his mindset. I really do believe this guy's, obviously, his career is waning. His biggest days are behind him. I'm convinced he married this Amal Clooney just because he wanted to make himself seem like a more serious person. So he found some human rights lawyer that would legitimize him, because I guess he didn't feel that way with the professional wrestler. And now parades around Hollywood like he's some sort of dignitary, like he's had some ambassador work under his belt. It's not true. You actually have to study. I'm glad he went to Darfur. I'm glad he went to Sudan. But I mean, the fact is George Clooney must not know anything if he doesn't know that I'm a journalist. I mean, truly, like, not to toot my own horn, but like, I think literally anybody who watches the news regularly in America would know that and would have some idea of some of the highlights because they have gone everywhere in certain instances. So this is George just being, I only watch CNN or MS, I'm above it all, but I am in a position to lecture you, lowly American losers, especially the MAGA folks, on what you need to be a good, informed person. So good luck with that and your crappy play. Okay, moving on to other items in the news. Let's talk about Pete Hegseth, who is in day whatever of an ongoing firestorm. It's been building for a while, but it's getting, I don't know if it's at its apex now or if we're about to get to the apex, but it's climbing, where he fired these alleged leakers. He accused these three guys, the Pentagon, and Pete signed off of it. These three guys at the Pentagon of leaking material that would have included top secret information to NBC News about attack plans in Panama, and said, we've gotten our guys. We feel satisfied. We're going to continue our investigation, but, I'm satisfied these are the people involved. They've all denied it. And then, was the subject of a barrage of bad press every day thereafter. That happened on Friday. It had this guy over in the comms shop who I guess they really didn't love, and he didn't want to be number two in the shop, and I guess that's all that was available to him in any event. He left. He wrote a scathing piece in Politico, which is not exactly where right-wingers run. Don Jr. disavowed that guy and said, he's not part of our movement. Don't believe this guy. And then the other three, at least one of them sat down with Tucker Carlson and said, this isn't about my alleged leaking, which I didn't do. This is about my position on Iran and being more dovish. The other two haven't really spoken out, I think, other than to deny that they're leakers. And now the narrative is building like everywhere because there's not like a strong MAGA media. Online in the digital lane, you've got MAGA supporters, but there's not like a publication like the Journal or the Post or the Times that's pro-Trump where you can kind of go to hear the MAGA defense. So you've got the Journal ripping on him. This morning I listened to this podcast. Sometimes I listen to Potomac Watch, which is the Journal editorial board people.
Right. Yeah, it's Paul.
Ripped him to shreds, right? Chaos. And it's just really too much chaos so he has to go, which to me seems like, well, you can't fire somebody because of chaos. We have to see if the chaos is real and what caused the chaos and then determine whether that's on him, right? In any event, you can see him twisting. So far, Trump is saying that he's standing behind him, but for how long remains a fair question. MBD, your thoughts on it?
Well, I'll be totally frank. I actually know one of the fired people involved, Dan Caldwell, the one who was on Tucker Carlson. I've known him for about 6 or 7 years. I find the idea that he would leak to liberal press absolutely preposterous, and I would stake quite a bet that he did not leak to NBC at all, and certainly that he didn't leak classified information. And I believe him when he says he didn't. There are reports today in Politico. There was a long report saying that there was actually less ideology than meets the eye in this internal knife fight. That in fact it was fueled by jealousy from another Hegseth chief of staff, Joe Casper, who's
just been moved out of that post.
Right. He was the one who supposedly initiated the investigation that led to the firing of those 3 staffers. And then he is now being pushed into a new role. Why? Hasn't been, I think, adequately.
I mean, I can report that he's not the decision maker, however. I can tell you that.
Right. Well, of course, he shouldn't. The buck stops with Hegseth. So Hegseth was obviously convinced that these 3 people did something wrong. I know Dan Caldwell to be a very loyal person who believes he becomes more effective by serving his boss well and then being handed more responsibility. And that's kind of marked his career. And I would stand by his reputation. I don't know. Colin was another one of these people fired. I don't know him well. And another one, Selnick, doesn't seem to have politics at all, as far as I can tell. No political record. He just has a record of reform in veterans affairs that I think was very strong during the first Trump administration. And we don't know,
MBD. It could be that like one of these guys is the suspected leaker and the other 2 have shrapnel wounds. I have no idea. But you're right. I haven't been able to determine like what did the other 2 have to do with it. Caldwell seems to be the face of it. And I'm not sure what the relation. It sounds like these 3 knew each other and were friendly with Pete too, which is to your point about this might have at least started with some sort of internal personality clashes or power struggles.
Right. I mean, these 3 have definitely been in same networks together, and networks together with veterans networks together that Pete Hegseth was a part of before he became head of the DOD. So people who were not privileged in that way may have been jealous of their influence, even if there was no political content to that jealousy. At the same time, there are politics to this, and it is interesting to see that there are people now rallying to Pete's side this week who 3 or 4 weeks ago were saying that what he did on the Signal chat was worth resigning over.
Let me ask you that. Is that more neocon-y people? Because it's very interesting to watch the factions, because Caldwell goes on with Tucker and says, what really was behind my termination is I am dovish on Iran. I do not think we should be bombing Iran through Israel or any other way. And now you have people who would like us to bomb Iran. Like, is Pete so bad? Because they're deducing maybe Pete's on the opposite side.
Well, I think there's fear that if Pete Hegseth goes, who replaces him? It could be someone already in the Department of Defense, someone like Elbridge Colby, who has said like, oh, we can contain Iran. Ukraine is a tertiary issue. We need to focus on China. That would be seen as a bigger threat. And Colby is a established kind of old school Republican hand. He's sort of like out of central casting from the 1950s through 70s, and knows where the bodies are buried. He could be very effective, whereas people may think Pete Hegseth is not totally in the camp of the restrainers and not totally in the camp of the hawks, but wants to serve his president, and the president himself is not hyper ideological on these questions. The president is willing to strike Iran, is willing to take out Soleimani, is willing to bomb them, and has said that Iran can't have Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, and he's willing to make the ground shake in order to bring that bring that fact into existence. So it's very consequent. The person who leads the Department of Defense is extremely consequential. And so it's not a surprise that there's intense rivalry. I mean, this is the biggest human organization on the planet. What you'd like to see is for Hegseth to succeed, and Dan Caldwell said he wants Hegseth to succeed on the Tucker Carlson show. I think Hegseth has to assert, a very firm chain of command at which he's at the top. There are no more rivalrous factions below him, that any rivalries that exist to serve him and to serve the president, right? To get the best advice, to get the best diversity of perspectives ahead of a major decision, and not to have this kind of knife fighting. Because, I mean, it seems to me like a lot of people who've been fired that can make a good contribution to our national security. And I think it's a shame.
We just don't know what they know. If some evidence comes out that they actually were funneling top secret information to NBC News, they'd have to be fired. Like, I have no idea whether that's coming, but I'm just saying, for example, that would be a no-brainer. And we don't know, but it certainly appears that some faction of these four, that comms guy, Elliott is his last name, or these three accused but denying that they are leakers, are leaking to the press right now, because Pete's on the other end of a battering ram since they got fired on Friday. It's like the New York Times had a long hit piece. Politico's had repeated hit pieces. NPR is reporting that they're looking for a new Pentagon chief, but that's one anonymous source, and NPR is not exactly known for its Trump world exclusives. So I don't know.
George Clooney might be more plugged in than NPR.
Yeah, seriously. So it's like, if I saw that from like Fox News, I'd pay attention. But yeah, I don't really know about the NPR sourcing there. I want to play this for you, Rich. Vice President Vance weighed in on Hegseth just this morning. Here's what he said.
Look, I have 100% confidence in the secretary. I know the president does, and really the entire team does. It's one of the most bizarre things about the Hegseth nomination. From the very beginning, the media seemed to want to tank it. And when they failed and they got confirmed, they decided they wanted to keep on that effort to destroy Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. I think he's doing a great job. I think that he's brought a certain spirit back to the Department of Defense. And if you look at our military recruitment numbers, that's, in my view, the best testament to his leadership of the military is that for the first time in a very long time, we don't have terrible recruitment problems in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. That's a great testament to his leadership, and I wish, frankly, the press talked more about that and not about anonymous sourcing from random staffers.
The recruiting numbers are good. They're very good, Rich. But yeah. Look, you and I both know that they always say they're standing behind the person until they
it's never 80% support, right? It's always
right.
100%.
So it's like almost meaningless to play those sound bites in all fairness. But at least publicly, Monday and Tuesday now, or I guess Monday and Wednesday, we've had direct sound bites from the president and vice president saying they are fully behind Pete.
Yeah. So you were right in what you said at the top of this segment. You got this dynamic going in the media where there are headlines about chaos at the Pentagon and there are headlines about chaos at the Pentagon, right? So they want to create this phenomenon. And very often it works. It's not going to work with Trump. I wouldn't expect him to be dumped over this anytime soon. But what's disturbing, and it relates to what JD said, right? Because JD went right to Pete's strength, right? Inspirational figure, more recruiting. People want to go and be in that organization that he's going to devote to war fighting. When people want to sign up for the military, that's why they want to do it, right? So everyone who's in favor of his nomination said he's a change agent, jolt of energy, better recruiting, great communicator. All that's true. But no one said he's a great administrator, and we're extremely confident he can run the Pentagon. And what's disturbing about this, it'd be one thing if the building just randomly, the establishment were shooting at him, and I'm sure it is, but this was a war, an ugly war for power and influence among his people, his loyalists,
that he brought in.
He brought in to help him run the building. So I still think the big question is, now, some people have, rocky starts when they take major steps in responsibility like this, and they figure it out, they learn from it, and it evens out. But there is a bigger question now, whether he'll be able to run the building. And this thing about the signal chat, who knows? We haven't seen a journalist wasn't CC'd on that, so we haven't actually seen them. But it just feels to me, when you're roping in your wife, your brother, your lawyer, you are someone who feels embattled doesn't know who to trust, and you're going down to this core of the very most loyal people you have. And that's just, you're not going to be able to run the building that way, right? He needs some big chief of staff who can really do this job. That's probably not within his current circle of trust, but he has to develop trust with. And this just isn't easy. You know, a lot of people aren't managers, and this is a huge managerial job. So I don't think he's going to get ousted for this. I would expect them to continue to support him, but I think there are concerns whether he can figure this out, and he needs to start figuring it out because it's a big job, and everyone should want him to succeed.
I mean, I will say this, MBD, this second signal text chain was reportedly with Pete, with his brother and his lawyer, both of whom are Pentagon employees now, and his wife, who's not, and some other collection, and I don't know who they are. Okay, I'm told that what's on there was declassified, like that he didn't share any classified information. But let me say this. Where was this leftist freak out when Joe Biden had Jill Biden at cabinet meetings, sitting at the Resolute desk with his jacket on the back of her chair? She shepherded him around to every official function. We have no idea whether she was secretly our president, but she absolutely was at cabinet meetings. They didn't care at all.
No, and not only that, her close aide was also responsible for guarding the president from staff and from other cabinet members. From the reporting we've seen, we saw that after the debate, Hunter Biden then came in and started performing that role, and there was no sign of outrage. This was just a family coming together to help their man in distress, and
he loves his son. He loves his son.
Counsel, one interesting possibility brought up. One thing I think people could look out for in the following days is, are the leaks still coming? So, and are they coming from within the Pentagon?
Mark my words.
Okay, so they're not done. If they are, could it really be these three guys? I mean, if they're leaking stuff that's actively in the Pentagon. And secondly, Caldwell pointed to the Defense Policy Board, which is not really a well-known institution, but this is something that is filled with Biden-era appointments like Susan Rice, Michelle Flournoy, Michael O'Hanlon of Brookings. Lots of Biden-era people are still on it. They haven't met since the Trump administration has taken office, but they all have security clearances. They all have access to career employees in the Department of Defense. And, that is not an unreasonable place to look for leaks when the news outlets are NBC and Politico.
I don't think Susan Rice and Michelle Flournoy are going to be on the Defense Advisory Board for much longer. Trump, as we all know, has had his hands full, but I'm going to make a bold prediction that they shouldn't get too comfortable in their seats. Go ahead, Rich. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, when this first broke and they're basically frog marched out of the building, I thought they had to have receipts. There's no way this happened without serious receipts. But then Caldwell's denial was so categorical with Tucker. As you pointed out, I think yesterday, Megyn, there's some legal jeopardy here. So usually if you have exposure, you're not going and talking about it at length with a high profile interviewer the way he did. And then Hegseth, in his interview on Fox and Friend with Brian Kilmeade, and I thought Brian did a great job. He said something that made my ears perked up. He said, and they or others around them might have been leaking. So wait a minute. So was it them? And we know it's them, and that's why they were removed and fired? Or is it someone around them? And who are those people? So the big question.
Whoever it was, like if it was one of these guys, or if it was somebody else that leaked that story to NBC News that the Pentagon had been asked to draw up attack plans for Panama, is going to jail. That person's going to prison. I have no idea who it is. But forget like the leak that Elon Musk came to the Pentagon and got a briefing. Mm-hmm. Forget all the other stuff. Like that report, whoever leaked to the NBC News reporter, is probably going to jail. So I do believe that in any Department of Defense, they would get to the bottom of who did that. It shouldn't be too difficult. There are lots of ways to find leakers. It's just a question of whether they will, and I guess what cooperation they're going to get from their suspects, whether it goes beyond these three. I want to play a soundbite of Pete on Fox and Friends yesterday. Listen here.
I mean, I've gotten a fraction of what President Trump got in that first term. What he's endured is superhuman. It's not hard for me to do this job. I know exactly why I'm here. to bring warfighting and the warfighting ethos back to the Pentagon, to rip out the insidious ideologies and not compromise and not back down. To bring in new press voices into the Pentagon, which we've done, to reestablish standards and accountability, to not tolerate leakers, to 100% operational control of our border, to get rid of trans lunacy in the military. We haven't backed down. See, here's the thing. A lot of people come to Washington and they just play the game. And it's you punch their ticket and get along to go along. And, start doing Meet the Press and going to the Council on Foreign Relations and spending time with all the new cocktail sipping crowd. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because President Trump asked me to bring warfighting back to the Pentagon every single day. Right. That is our focus. And if people don't like it, they can come after me. No worries. I'm standing right here. The warfighters are behind us. Our enemies know they're on notice. Our allies know we're behind them. And that, in this dangerous world, for the American people is what it's all about.
All right, I'm just going to be honest. I don't think that was that great. The first half was solid and right on. And then it seemed to me he was a little nervous. He struck me as nervous, which you don't normally see with Pete, and certainly somebody who's on TV as often as Pete has been. And so this is totally my speculation, but it made me feel like, not that they have him on the ropes exactly, Rich, but I feel like he knows he's embattled, like the voice going up and like getting super defensive toward the end. Yeah. That to me, more than anything else, telegraphed like he might be a little worried here.
Yeah. So look, great communicator, no doubt about it. Great communicator. Yeah. There's a reason he was on TV, but a little overly defensive, a little excitable, kind of jumping around a little bit. There's some people giving the advice, don't do any more media for the time being, but his survival there and his success, which is more important. Pete Hegseth doesn't matter in the scheme of things. You want him actually to make our force more lethal and lean and mean and all that depends on running the building. And it's really hard coming in as a change agent, one of these big agencies. It's really, really hard. Very few people actually succeed in it, but he needs some help in that regard. And the first team of people he brought in that he thought were loyalists maybe weren't, obviously was not it. So he's going to have a second bite of the apple. But we should hope he has some serious administrators who are going to run the place for him.
Yeah, I have to say, like, still totally rooting for him. I think he probably will survive this unless there's some other big shoe to drop. We had leaks. There was an investigation. They tell us they found the leakers. Those guys deny it, but that's what the Pentagon says that they are. And then a barrage of negative press accounts about Pete hit the news. I don't think that makes a fireable defense secretary, not in Trump world. I think Trump's going to understand what's happening right now. And if there's ongoing problems, if this becomes chronic and it's just like a distraction, then he'll turf him because he's not afraid of firing people. But I don't think we're there yet. I'll just wait to see what else. I do believe other negative press will be coming, and we'll see what it is and how it's handled. I mean, it's so weird to be getting your Trump updates in Politico and the New York Times. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Who are these people? Who turns to them? Okay, anyway, moving on. Did you catch the Larry David piece, obviously, on Bill Maher? This is a couple days old now, but we haven't talked about it on the show, and it's just amazing. So he pens a piece in the New York Times, an op-ed called My Dinner with Adolf. It comes on the heels of Maher's dinner with Trump. He doesn't name Maher. It's very clearly about Maher. In part, it reads, imagine my surprise when in the spring of 1939, a letter arrived at my house inviting me to dinner at the old chancellery with the world's most reviled man, Adolf Hitler. I had been a vocal critic of his on the radio from the beginning, pretty much predicting everything he was going to do on the road to dictatorship. No one I knew encouraged me to go. He's Hitler. He's a monster, in quotes. But eventually I concluded that hate gets us nowhere. I know he couldn't change his views, but we need to talk to the other side, even if it has invaded and annexed other countries and committed unspeakable crimes against humanity. Blah, 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 blah. I joked that I was surprised to see him in a tan suit because if he wore that out, it would be perceived as un-Führer-like. That amused him to no end, and I realized I'd never seen him laugh before. Suddenly, he seemed so human. Here I was, prepared to meet Hitler, the one I'd seen and heard, the public Hitler. But this private Hitler was a completely different animal. And oddly enough, this one seemed more authentic, like this was the real Hitler. The whole thing had my head spinning. 2 hours later, the dinner was over, and the Fuhrer escorted me to the door. I'm so glad to have met you. I hope I'm no longer the monster you thought I was. I must say, mein Fuhrer, I'm so thankful I came. Although we disagree on many issues, it doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. And with that, I gave him a Nazi salute and walked out into the night. This is unbelievable, Michael. Unbelievable. So, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you weren't supposed to use Hitler to make your points, but okay, I guess we're past that. Your thoughts on it?
I mean, what? I have to say I'm surprised. Larry David has appeared on Saturday Night Live with Trump and making a joke where he shouts, "Trump's a racist," and like an annoying liberal lefty from Hollywood would. And it seemed to be he was self-deprecating on this point. And in fact, one of his there's a very funny episode of his show, Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he decides that wearing a MAGA hat is a perfect way of getting out of awkward social obligations in Hollywood.
And also where he goes into a Holocaust museum and steals the shoes that are on display of Holocaust victims because he needs new shoes. He's been, irreverent, certainly when it comes to the Holocaust and obviously Trump.
Very irreverent and irreverent too. I mean, arguably, there was an episode of a show where he came to discover that his, descendants were not Cohen cone, but Cone cone, and the episode was basically an anti-Semitic tract of him discovering that he was of Christian parentage, and then he became a nicer, kinder, gentler, braver, more voluntaristic person. I mean, so I always thought of Larry David as someone who, stood aside from liberal pieties in Hollywood and in fact made fun of them. And then I was actually just shocked that he,
Didn't you ever hear about his fight with Alan Dershowitz? Alan Dershowitz has been railing about Larry David for calling him out for defending Trump in the first impeachment trial for years now. You know how Alan, he holds a grudge. And he basically screamed at Alan in a Martha's Vineyard 7-Eleven for doing this. He's not a tolerant guy. I don't know, Rich. To me,
very well.
It really is amazing that he wrote this and that the Times printed this.
Yeah, they always go to Hitler. It's so boring. It's so conventional, but they can't help themselves. There's nothing that Trump has in common with Hitler, right? He's a thoroughly American figure, runs through this populist tradition, going through Andrew Jackson, Huey Long, George Wallace, not the racism of George Wallace, but the anti-elitism. And there are things to like and really dislike about that tradition. That's all fair game. But they got to go to Hitler. And look, Bill Maher did the right thing, right? Donald Trump, like it or not, is at the center of our national life. Bill Maher is a hugely consequential commentator who talks about Donald Trump all the time. He should know as much as he reasonably can about Donald Trump. And as Winston Churchill used to say, there's nothing like being there, going yourself and seeing yourself. And he learned things about Donald Trump, right? And they didn't accord with his worldview. And unlike George Clooney, until the last moment with Joe Biden, he admits it and will admit the attention and say he actually learned something and he's going to share it with his viewers, which is the honest, factual thing to do. And the fact is, Donald Trump in person, he's a professional host in part, so he can be extremely gracious. He's a great one-on-one politician, which accounts for a lot of his hold on the Republican Party, which you might miss unless you know that about him. And now Bill Maher knows it. He went and found out, which was the right thing to do.
And Larry David digs in saying, basically, but you met with Hitler. We don't want to hear about the softer side of Hitler. That's really what he's saying here. Without it ever even occurring to him, what if what's happening is he's not Hitler? And Bill Maher is starting to realize that. Might there be secret option number 2? Stay with me here, Larry. That Trump actually doesn't annex countries and hasn't killed 6 million people and might actually be somebody who could really help the country out. I said it. He can't. He's too far gone. The TDS is too advanced. It's a stage 5 TDS situation. I'm sorry, but oh well. Okay, stand by. Rich and MBD, stay with me. Quick break first. If you're a business owner, listen up. Are you sure you're not leaving money on the table when it comes time to exit your business? Thousands of business owners have already used FYSI's exit strategy and valuation services to sell smart and profit big. Why? FYSI will help you plan and position your business for the maximum return. That's what separates billion-dollar companies from small businesses. And FYSI can help you secure your legacy. Time matters, so don't wait until it's too late. Use promo Megyn to schedule your free $5,000 risk assessment at fysi.com/Megyn or call 800-877-4000. That's promo code Megyn to schedule your assessment for free. Visit fysi.com/Megyn or call 800-877-4000 today.
What did Hitler do in the Holocaust? He took people from Germany to other countries.
Yeah.
Where there was no German law. There was not even a pretense of German law. They took them to Poland or, Hungary or whatever, and they killed them.
And so when you see what's happening right now with this El Salvadoran gulag, I mean, this CCOT gulag, he's basically taking a page out of that playbook, you think?
Well, it gets them out of the country.
Okay, that's more Hitler talk from Chris Matthews and Jim Acosta. Welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show. Back with you now, Rich Lowry and MBD, Michael Brendan Dougherty of National Review. Become an NR Plus member today to get all of their content. I love NR Plus. I don't agree with everything they write, but I love them all except for one, and that I'll keep that to myself. Anyway, it's no one on this show. Okay. So yeah, more Hitler-esque talk, this time about the El Salvadoran prison. That's why he's doing it, because he's going to ship them overseas and kill them. I heard that phrase come out. They don't point out that most of the people who have been shipped there so far are El Salvadoran. And if not, they're Venezuelan gang members who we could put in prisons here too. And by the way, any illegal who gets arrested and, has to face deportation and a hearing, has to go to jail. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. We haven't been under Joe Biden, but you're supposed to hold them. Unfortunately, you're only allowed to hold them for 90 days, and then you got to let them roam, and then they're never seen from again. But what Trump is doing is saying, these are people who have been deported. We believe that the vast majority of these people, if not all these people, have already been deported, like ordered removed. They had their due process, and now he's doing exactly that. Now, what's going to happen to them after a year in this prison? I don't know, because, you can't hold them forever. But I haven't seen any assurances that's not the plan. I'm not sure, Rich, but where do you stand on the El Salvadoran prison and in general on what Trump's doing with the immigration reform?
Yeah. So this is my latest hot take on this, Megyn. One, the politics are just terrible for Democrats, right? Because if you say I'm advocating, they have so little credibility on immigration. If you say I'm advocating for a legal immigrant who may have beaten his wife, probably did beat his wife, maybe a member of MS-13, but it's all about due process, a lot of the public's just going to hear, oh, you're advocating for an illegal immigrant who may have beaten his wife and maybe a member of MS-13. So this is not a good issue for them. But I think, like, substantively, in terms of where we are in deportations, it's the whole alien enemies thing is a blind alley. Let's say the administration succeeds legally, which seems unlikely, but all the TDA members go to that prison in El Salvador. Okay, great. We still have 18 million illegal immigrants here. And so far, there are a couple things that need to happen to really deal with that. Many people you've pointed out, the problem is they come in here without any due process, right? And then once they're here, there's all this procedures, and it's so hard to get them out. So one, you need Congress. We need more ICE officers. We need more detention space. And during the campaign, they were talking about massive tent cities to house people. Where's that? Well, you need Congress to fund it. And then you need reform of the asylum system, which is an outrage, which was abused by this guy, Abrego Garcia, not technically asylum, a withholding, a removal, but it was basically the same thing. It was absurd. His family suffered from gang violence. They weren't persecuted in El Salvador. And the business that was being extorted had closed at the time he got this withholding or removal. So the occasion for this extortion that he was complaining about was no longer there. And then the gang got crushed, right? So there's no fear whatsoever. And he was still living free in this country. So you need to change all that. But also, I think it's within the power of the Trump administration now to do work site raids. And it's understandable they're going after the worst of the worst. You do that for some substantive reasons, obviously. You do it for the politics. But you got to, I'm making up the numbers, you got to send like 15 ICE agents to get one guy because he might be a threat. He might shoot at you, right? You need a lot of robust presence. Worksite raids, you send 5 ICE agents to a meatpacking plant in Iowa and you get 150 guys and you deport them. and then you fine the hell out of that meatpacking plant. And then what happens is every other meatpacking plant in Iowa says, we don't want to be fined. They go to their legal employees, sorry, guys, you can't work here anymore. And then you might have some of those legal employees saying, you know what, I don't want to be deported, I don't want to be held in detention. I'll go home on my own. And the biggest thing we need, which is I've been shocked for 10 years that Donald Trump doesn't talk about this. He's very ambiguous on this issue. You need a so-called E-Verify system. That's a foolproof system where you just can't hire people who are illegal aliens. That dries up all the jobs. And then you might have, millions of people saying, we don't want to be here anymore. So we're just not going to be able to cherry pick our way through 18 million people and work through this process and really move the numbers. You need those kind of things to make a big difference in my mind.
No, we're not. MBD, one interesting fact, Rich mentioned that Abrego Garcia, he's the one, MS-13, an accused wife beater. And he's the one Chris Van Hollen went over there to meet with and was photographed with the margaritas in front of them. And it's a setup. They set me up. Well, if you're too dumb not to understand propaganda, too bad on you. In any event, here he was in 2017. Chris Van Hollen, the Heritage Foundation tweeted this out, and we verified it. It's real. This is 2017, Chris Van Hollen. Shame on President Trump for tearing apart hardworking immigrant families. We should be focused on MS-13, not scholarship winners. How times have changed. Now he's dancing the waltz with the guy and sipping the margaritas, or so it would appear.
Well, at first, the first move of Democrats, right, was to deny that he was part of MS-13 and try to make him into Father of the Year. It was,
yes.
It's pathetic. I do think, I actually disagree with Rich a little bit. I actually think this is giving Democrats a little bit of juice, at least among their base. I'm seeing all over social media, hysterical conspiracy theories that, this is a test run. They're going to do this to,
right,
a deportable alien first, and then they're going to start doing it to American
Rachel
citizens.
Maddow will be next. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And so I do think it is, I think it's actually the first time since Trump has been inaugurated that Democrats have been able to focus on one story and bring sustained attention to it. I agree with Richard. It probably doesn't work with independents, and it certainly doesn't work with Republicans. But motivating the base is what Democrats have to do to start rebuilding their party, getting fundraising up. And I think that's what they're doing. And, El Salvador officials are very cagey in getting Abrego Garcia to be dressed up in, civilian clothes, not looking like he's coming out of Dachau or something like that. He looks like he almost looked like he was at a resort with the cup in front of him. It was a little bit
the plaid
of
summer
silly
colors, the button-down shirt. Yeah, more and more we're hearing this. And Trump made some comment about it was like a reference to possible American criminals being sent to this prison. And the left, of course, that just fed right into their belief that, Rachel Maddow's going to go. He's just going to start deporting people he doesn't like. He wasn't talking about deporting Americans. He was talking about prison space. And it'd be great if we could house some of our worst prisoners in a place like this so we didn't have to worry about them. But this keeps getting brought up by the left as proof he wants to ship Americans, law-abiding Americans or any other kind of Americans, without due process to El Salvador. Here's Simone Sanders to the point you just made on MSNBC, MBD.
The realistic way in which democracies die is that it's dismantled brick by brick, piece by piece. That is why Kilmar Abrego Garcia's specific case, the case of the gentleman who's a makeup artist out of California who was also sent to that prison. That is why the 75% of the folks who have been sent, the men who have been sent there that don't have criminal records, that is why this is so important. Because if they could do it to them, if they could snatch students off the street without any pushback or recourse, they will do it to any of us. To be very clear, it's going to be the people of color and vulnerable communities that are next in line.
That is the only proper response, Rich Lowry. Thank you for knowing exactly what to say.
Yeah, of course. I think this Megyn, though, it does go to a contradiction. On the one hand, illegal immigrants, they should be detained until their proceedings are fully worked out and they're removed. That's what the law says, and we just never done it. No one's done it. Abrego Garcia was released during the first Trump administration. He should have been held. They all should be held, but we need more detention space to do that. But if the argument is, well, this in El Salvador is just basically detention space like in America, then you're going to get the courts will saying, okay, you effectively have control over all these prisoners. So if we're telling you to bring them back, it's not a foreign policy issue. It's just a U.S. detention space like any other. It just happens to be overseas. So again, they're straining at every possible, looking for every possible avenue they can to hopscotch procedural obstacles to get the numbers of deportations up, right? Because we had 10 million come in or whatever it was the last 4 years, and they got to go, and they should go. I just don't think they're going to prevail on this one.
What's crazy, Michael, is that you've now got, you had the Supreme Court weigh in twice so far on the Alien Enemies Act, which is Trump's best tool, he thinks, toward getting these people out of here and getting them out fast. And the first one was, this statute is reviewable, but only in a small part. And the second was, and to say, if you want to bring a challenge under it, you have to file a habeas proceeding, meaning an objection to whether you qualify as like an actual gang member under his order in the jurisdiction where you're being held. So, not in front of D.C. Judge Boasberg, but in that case, it was in Texas where they had the deportees. And then, secondly, they just weighed in on Friday night to say, stop all deportations under the Alien Enemies Act until we can figure out what's going on, which was very sweeping, 7-2. Alito went off the next day. And not a good ruling for Trump, but not a permanent. That's like, just stop until we can address this case on the merits, and it's working its way up. But what you got in the meantime was this decision from this Judge Charlotte Sweeney, a Biden appointee, who just ruled that she's certified a putative class, meaning she's given the initial blessing for this whole thing to be on a class action track for all Alien Enemies Act deportees to be part of a class, and said they have to get at least 21 days notice before you can remove them. So she said, the Supreme Court didn't say how much due process is enough, but according to this judge, we have to, for 21 days, we got to let these people stick around. This is the worst of the worst. Can you imagine what's going to happen when we get to the ones who aren't additional criminals?
I mean, it is preposterous. I mean, the idea that you're going to have ICE roll up and give this 21-day notice, which is like you have 3 weeks to disappear from here and find a cousin in another state to stay with until we lose you again. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. It's basically lawless. I understand. I understand a little bit why some Democrats and some judges are alarmed by the use of this act. Whether it's really proper to consider illegal immigrants, part of a hostile invasion, in the laws of war. I understand that reticence, but you can't just make up law like out of nowhere and invent judicial process from nothing. But we've seen this over and over again, this judicial brinksmanship under Trump that is absolutely destabilizing to self-government. It's not a surprise that you're getting a lot of, MAGA Republicans getting radicalized about the judiciary and saying, we need to, in the words of J.D. Vance, like the court's issued its warning, now let the court enforce it, and just ignore the judicial branch. I don't think Donald Trump wants to go that far, but boy, that ruling really is tempting,
Yes.
Test case.
Here's what she said. The government must provide both petitioners, in this case, this is out of Colorado District Court, and the provisionally certified class of individuals they seek to represent, meaning all deportees under the Alien Enemies Act, with a 21-day notice to the individuals detained pursuant to the act. So anybody who's going to be deported pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act and Trump's proclamation to get a 21-day notice, must state the government intends to remove the individual pursuant to the act and the proclamation, must provide notice of a right to seek judicial review, must inform the individuals that they may consult an attorney regarding their detainment and the government's intent to remove them, must be written in a language that the individual understands. I mean, these are people who literally crossed our southern border illegally, committed crimes against American citizens when they got here. In some cases, resisted Tom Homan when he tried to arrest them. And now, I mean, this is unbelievable. Each one gets 21-day notice and hearing. What's next? Like court-appointed counsel. So we're paying for their defense, and all the way through to the U.S. Supreme Court. Each one of these guys is going to appeal up to the U.S. Supreme Court on the worst. This is why we really are headed for a showdown here, Rich, where if we get more rulings like we got from our Colorado friend, Charlotte Sweeney, a Biden appointee who hasn't done anything in her very short career to distinguish herself as a foreign policy expert or an immigration expert, but now thinks she's co-president, is really, they're begging Trump to ignore them.
Yeah. So on the procedures, this is why we should do many more expedited removals. My understanding, the statute, you can do an expedited removal. It's basically no process. It's kind of a common sense thing. They come here illegally, you turn them back around, and they go home, right? That's what most people
think. But here's the one exception. So Trump expanded expedited removal to go beyond just the southern border and the initial encounter. But if they claim asylum, then you do have to give them an asylum hearing.
The broken and insane and lunatic asylum process is a huge element of this immigration crisis we've experienced over the last 10 years or so. It needs to be drastically reformed, and perhaps my friend Mark Krikorian, the Center for Immigration Studies, makes a very compelling case. We shouldn't do it at all. You know, we can have a certain number of refugees, they're in our country, in some other country, and we decide to admit them. But the whole process of someone getting here and then starting this huge procedural process, that means they'll stay, right? That's how it's worked in the past. That's why they're coming. That's why they say these certain things that they think are magic words that get them to stay. That's got to end. But you need Congress to do it. On this thing, the El Salvador prison, I think there are a couple of reasons the administration's dug in. One, they don't like to admit mistakes. I do think Abrego Garcia, clearly deportable alien, could have been deported anywhere else. I think he should come home and be deported to Panama immediately in accordance with the lawful process. But one, they don't like admitting error. Two, they want this power, right, to be able to do this in an expedited manner. Three, as we were discussing earlier, I know MBD disagrees a little bit, they think it's good politics. And four, if, I hope they don't do this, they shouldn't do this in my mind, if they're going to defy a court on something, this thing is set up perfectly for that purpose, right? Supreme Court says, bring him back, and you say, he's in El Salvador.
Make us.
You go get him, right? You go get him.
To the point you were just making, here's Tom Homan on Fox today, SOT 4.
Here's what they're doing, Bill. Here's the plan. The Biden administration overwhelmed the system. 10.5 million people came to the border. They know it's going to take years to get through the court docket. By then, they're hoping there's another Democratic administration in. They'll have U.S. citizen children. Then all of a sudden, nobody wants them removed. We're spoiling their plans to have future Democratic voters and through a census, have control of the House. Through a census vote, Democratic sanctuary cities get more seats in the House. This is their plan. To the immigration courts, to appeal after appeal after appeal, district judge to slow us down, because their hopes is they'll gain power again, then they can warrant amnesty to 10 million illegal aliens that are released in this country illegally. That is their plan, and we're trying to remove these public safety threats and national security threats as quick as possible.
On that same front, MBD, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court stopped the deportations under the Alien Enemies Act on Friday night at 1 a.m. They stopped them. So when's our hearing? When is this resuming? When are we going to know what Trump can do, the commander-in-chief, the duly elected president of the United States? And Mike Davis, very smart lawyer with the Article 3 Project, tweeted out the following: Dear Commanding General John Roberts, when does the President of the United States have your permission to resume his military operation to deport the most dangerous terrorists in the Western Hemisphere? Or do you want the President to ship them to the Chevy Chase Country Club? I mean, now we're talking.
I mean, he's exactly right. I mean, when do we get our president back? Right? I mean, that's the Supreme Court effectively absconded with the presidency until further notice. And we only have Justice Alito standing up. It's insane. And yes, there are limits, right? You could say that the court order says, we want the president to effectuate bringing back Garcia from El Salvador. But he belongs in facilitate. Yeah. He belongs in El Salvador.
Not effectuate.
And he belongs in El Salvador, and there are limits. I mean, it's not like the Supreme Court can say, send the Navy and launch an amphibious invasion and then go rescue him. Give me a break. I mean, this is making up law. I mean, the president has an ability to negotiate with other sovereign heads of states, and to proceed and carry out lawful actions. And once he does, there are consequences to that aren't reversible and aren't justiciable. So, this is going too far. And the Supreme Court had better get out of this by the end of this week, because otherwise it is going to be tempting another huge confrontation with the president. And in most cases, when they sit down to rule, they look at the Constitution, they look at Article 1 and Article 2, and they decide, you know what, the president really has authority over executive actions, and Congress really has authority over the law. And there's nothing we can, do about it. And there's no lacuna to hide in.
Here is another thing, speaking of the Supreme Court. You guys probably saw this case went up yesterday involving Maryland parents it's a group of Muslims, Christians, and Jews who said, we've had it with your weird, hypersexual LGBTQ propaganda being shoved into our children's curriculum in the pre-K through 5 years. Pre-K. And I didn't watch the argument yet, but most court observers who I trust think the parents are going to win this, which it would be amazing. It will be a very historic ruling if they do. The restoration of parental rights, another thing Trump ran on, by the way. And this could be a ruling that could have far-ranging implications. Here's a sample of how it went. This is the attorney for the schools, Montgomery County schools. His name's Alan Schoenfeld, getting the business from Trump appointee Justice Neil Gorsuch.
They're being used in English language instruction at age 3. Some of them.
So Pride Puppy was the book that was used for the pre-kindergarten curriculum. That's no longer in the curriculum.
That's the one where they are supposed to look for the leather and things and bondage, things like that.
It's not bondage. It's a woman in a leather.
Sex worker, right?
No, that's not correct. No.
I thought, I read it.
It's a drag queen.
Drag queen and drag
correct.
queen.
The leather that they're pointing to is a woman in a leather jacket. And one of the words is drag queen in the search.
And they're supposed to look for those.
It is an option at the end of the book, correct?
Yeah, okay.
They're going down. And it's going to be a glorious thing, Rich, when they do go down.
Oh, yeah. Vomitous. God bless these parents for standing up. It's not always easy to do this. The Montgomery County, one of their arguments was, we can't have an opt-out because so many parents will opt out. Well,
yeah,
maybe that's
they
a
said
sign,
it became unruly.
Right?
Yeah, what does that tell
maybe
you?
That's a sign. The public school should be consensus, boring, conventional, educational matter. That's it. College, yeah. Take your courses on controversial literary theory or critical theory or whatever, but not in grade school. And I think they will prevail. They should prevail. The argument that was made from the progressive side, from the bench, is that this isn't coercion. It's just exposing the children to this material. But that's part of the point, right? These parents don't want their children exposed to Pride Puppy and searching for leather outfits in a book for second graders or whatever it is. It is absurd. The only case you can make for having this stuff in the classroom is that you're going to have an opt-out. You shouldn't even have it then. But to not have an opt-out is totally sustainable, wrong, a travesty, won't stand.
That's all they're asking for is an opt-out. This coalition of parents, they're not saying you have to remove it from the curriculum. They're saying we just want an opt-out. And by the way, where are all the Muslim advocates? Where's Rashida Tlaib? This is a group, the named plaintiffs are Muslim. A lot of Muslims in this community saying this is totally not kosher with, I guess kosher is the wrong word, but they're not okay with our religion in promoting this stuff. Not one of the representatives is out there. It's all about Palestine for her. She won't advocate for them. We'll give another one. Here's Justice Kagan. Even Kagan, who, I think technically she's straight. We talked about this another time. Anyway, but even Kagan seemed a bit taken aback by this going out to the very, very young kids. It's SOT 18.
I, too, was struck by these are, young kids, picture books, and on matters concerning sexuality. I suspect there are a lot of non-religious parents who weren't all that thrilled about this. But I guess I'm searching for what in your legal arguments would allow us to draw lines in this area.
We think there are lines that can be drawn. They're the same lines that this court has drawn in every other free exercise case. And the burden, a plaintiff has to show that its beliefs are religious, that they are sincere. There has to be a substantial infringement or burden or pressure.
I'm really searching for something, and I know that you realize that, and you're still not giving me anything other than if it's in a school and a sincere religious parent has an objection, that objection is always going to result in an opt-out. No matter what the instruction is like, no matter what the materials are, no matter how old the kids are.
And that's the rule that schools everywhere in the country are working under right now.
Justice Alito, too, also noted that this case involves extremely young children, as young as 5, noting that as kids become older, they're better able to make distinctions about what a teacher's presenting. But when they're that young, it's a very different story. It's really up to adults to filter out what's inappropriate for them. Michael, I don't think this is going to be one of those cases where Roberts goes soft-kneed or Amy Coney Barrett goes soft-kneed. I think it's looking like a 6-3 decision from what I've read so far.
I think you're right. I mean, ideally, not only that, ideally Gorsuch would then run back and try to rewrite Bostock decision, because this is actually a downward consequence of that decision. This is him reaping what he sowed so many years ago, which is basically that he said that if you read the 1964 Civil Rights Act with the same squinted Episcopal eyes that he brought to the case, that transgender people have civil rights as transgender identity. And of course, the schools in the United States would then follow up with a curriculum to foster respect for the most minority of sexual minorities. Of course, this is the downward effect of that. And he should repent. Like, we should get sackcloth and ashes out besides the judicial garb. No, I don't think it's going to be close. But there's also a kind of, problem in our ruling about religious freedoms in this, is that you have to prove that there's a sincere religious belief. Like, is it really a religious belief that men are men and women are women?
It's so true.
I mean, I suppose it is. I mean, we could have a school of people come along and say, listen, technically when you sit on a chair, there actually is an exchange of molecules between the chair and your physical body. Therefore, there's no distinction between the two. And I can throw you out of a window just as easily as I throw the chair out of a window. And then I have to come and say, well, my Christian faith teaches me that, in fact, a person is a person and a chair is a chair. I mean, give me a break. Do we have anything common underlying our law? Or can any fool theory come out of an academic department and lead to us introducing 4-year-olds to leather daddies and drag queens? Give me a break.
So well said. Yeah, the books are nuts. There's, what are your words? One character in the book says, my pronouns are like the weather. They change depending on how I feel. Somebody says, sometimes I use all the pronouns I can think of. Another book, Prince and Knight, grades K through 5. A young prince and a knight fall in love after battling a dragon together. I mean, okay. Just like when we were kids, right? I mean, like they battle the dragon and then they hop in bed together. That's not how the story ends. Born Ready, a mother tells the story of her transgender son, Penelope, again, K through 5. Another book called Love, Violet, about a same-sex crush between classmates. Uncle Bobby's Wedding, where a niece is concerned about her uncle who's engaged to another man, won't spend time with her anymore. Look, I'm just going to end with this. One of the other news sources that George Clooney loves is 60 Minutes. And let me just show you, as I say goodbye, how 60 Minutes, when they had Moms for Liberty on, who's been objecting to these kinds of books in our curriculum, K through 12 education, this is how the vaunted 60 Minutes, George, handled it.
There are rogue teachers in America's classrooms right now.
Rogue teachers.
Rogue teachers.
Parents send their children to school to be educated, not indoctrinated into ideology.
What ideology are they being indoctrinated into?
Let's just say children in America cannot read.
They often dodged questions with talking points.
You're being evasive.
21% of Hispanic students are reading on grade level.
Evasive. What ideology are the children being indoctrinated into? What is your fear?
I think parents' fears are realized. They're looking at these books where sexual discussions are happening with their children at younger and younger ages.
Tiffany Justice read from sexually explicit books written for older teens, but found in a few lower schools. Most people wouldn't want them in a lower school. But in a tactic of outrage politics, Moms for Liberty takes a kernel of truth and concludes these examples are not rare mistakes, but a plot to sexualize children.
Unbelievable. Now it's gotten so bad, and it was when they sat with him 2 years ago, that this case has gone all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and not a party is arguing it isn't happening. It was not an outrage politics measure. It is not a rare mistake. It's policy that they're openly fighting for and fighting to prevent opt-outs from Scott and George. So pay attention to some better news sources, because that one failed mightily. Unbelievable. Is it not, Rich? It's incredible.
That clip, it's so telling, because that is what they used to call the voice of God, right? That was Walter Cronkite. That was when there were 3 broadcast networks and nothing else, and they were just telling you the truth. You know, you sat down for 30 minutes and you had to believe every word they say. His DNA is right from there. That's in his line of authority, and he has the voice, he has the look, but it's just so obviously stilted and ridiculous and wrong. And so that's why that whole mode of media is not as influential as it was and never will be again.
Yeah, well said. Guys, great to see you. Thanks for coming. See you soon.
Megyn, I got a programming tip for you, by the way. Or recommendation. I think you need to do an afternoon update too. So you're doing morning show and afternoon. So you're literally just broadcasting all during the day, right? Just go do the full thing, right? Don't hang
Abigail
back.
Finan just screamed from the next room. Oh my gosh, I can't. We're up to here. But the AM update is doing really well, so people are enjoying it. So we do it. Anyway, great to see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, up next, Dr. Dale Bredesen with the latest on how you can prevent Alzheimer's. Yes, it's preventable. Just ask him. Spring is here and summer is around the corner. With sweatpants season finally over, it's time to swap those winter sweats for outfits that turn heads. When you are looking to refresh your wardrobe, Daily Look has you covered. It's a fantastic personal styling service for women. With Daily Look, you get your own dedicated stylist to curate a box of clothes based on your body shape, preferences, and lifestyle. These are real personal stylists, not an algorithm, and you get the same stylist every time. You start by filling out their style quiz and sharing your price range and your lifestyle preferences, and then they send up to 12 handpicked items straight to your home. You try them on, you keep what you love, send back the rest. And the best part is, Daily Look covers shipping both ways. Whether you need something chic for the office or you want to upgrade from last year's sundress, Daily Look has you covered. Head on over to dailylook.com to take your style quiz and use code Megyn for 50% off your first order. That's dailylook.com for 50% off, and make sure you use my promo code Megyn so they know I sent you. Dailylook.com, promo code MEGYN. Did you know that a couple of years ago, researchers from Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association released the following stats? They did a long study, and the authors affirmed that while the vast majority of cases of Alzheimer's are found in Americans over the age of 65, between 2013 and 2017, they found a 143% increase in diagnoses for those between 55 and 64, a 311% increase in diagnoses of Alzheimer's for those between 45 and 54, and a 373% increase in diagnoses for those between 30 and 44. So listen up. You need to know what you can do to stave off Alzheimer's. And my next guest, a medical doctor, says you can. He's been on the show before. His name is Dr. Dale Bredesen. I respect him immensely. And he's back with a new book called The Ageless Brain: How to Sharpen and Protect Your Mind for a Lifetime. Dale, welcome back to the show. Wonderful to see you. Those stats are really alarming. So is it actually a growing problem, or we're just getting better at diagnosing?
It's a growing problem. When I was training many years ago, we never saw people in their 40s, 50s. This was a disease of late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Now, one of the most common things we see is people who are in their 40s or 50s who are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So yes, we're getting a little better at diagnosing it for sure. There are new blood tests, et cetera, but there's no question it is on the increase in these young groups.
Okay, we've talked before about some of the preventative measures, and I want to go back over some of them now, but I'm going to lead with the most controversial, but maybe promising. You tell me, can Ozempic help stave off Alzheimer's and dementia?
It is possible. That's one of the many things, we're hearing from RFK about all these different things. One of the issues is, what are we doing about metabolism? We do not have an optimal, as you know, we do not have an optimal metabolism in most people in this country. Too much high carb food, too much ultra processed food, and a lot of damage, frankly, to our metabolic systems. And so this is one of the possibilities. And there are other things as well. There are things you can do to avoid that. But improving your insulin sensitivity, of course, what Ozempic will do will increase your endogenous insulin as well. The problem, of course, is that there are some side effects, and we don't yet know the long-term effects of using GLP-1s.
What effect on Alzheimer's do statins have? Because I've been hearing all sorts of info about they're good, no, they're bad.
Yeah, it's a great point because they're both. That's the problem. So they have one effect, which is to reduce the overall inflammation. And as I pointed out in the book, and which, as you know, this book is really about saving synapses for all of us. In the U.S., whether you live to 80, 90, 100, 110, of course, people are trying to push that up far to 140, 160, whatever it is. Your lifespan, unfortunately, is not met often by your brain span. So you get to 40 or 50 or 60 and things just collapse, as you know. And so as you indicated, more young people having a problem. So this is a time in which you've got to look at what are these different drivers and what'll happen with the statins, yes, you lower the inflammation, which, by the way, you can do with other things. You don't need statins to do that. But you also lower the support for the brain. You lower the cholesterol. And to be fair, you make some in the brain as well. But if you use a statin, if you have to do that, and we recommend you do other things first, there are things like Zetia and bergamot and just changing your diet and exercise, a lot of things you can do before you ever need statins. And there are also things beyond. PCSK9 inhibitors can be even better than this. But if you're going to use a statin, use one that would be called a hydrophilic statin. That would be like a Crestor, instead of one that is a hydrophobic statin, which would be like a Lipitor.
Let's go through again. The book is called The Ageless Brain by Dr. Dale Bredesen, who I completely respect and support. The diet, exercise, supplements, and toxins, I think are like the big categories. I've heard you say dairy is not great. Now, dairy, you're saying Greek yogurt every day is not good for preventing Alzheimer's, because it's so good for doing so many other things for you.
Yeah, it's a great point. And for some people, it'll be okay. But here's the problem. When you have any sort of dairy can produce some degree of inflammation. So if you've got someone who already has some degree of cognitive decline, or if you're trying to optimize your brain span, then you want to take that into account. You want to get rid of grains, which can damage your lining of your gut. You want to get rid of dairy. And it's not to say you can't slowly reintroduce it in the future, but you have to remember, when you see someone who's beginning to have some cognitive decline, only one of two things will happen. Either you will help them to improve, and we've published that many times, or they will die. they will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease and pass away. So we want to do everything possible. We want to pull out all the stops to get the optimal reversal of cognitive decline. And we were the first to publish that back in 2014. And so we want to do everything possible. That includes getting rid of some grains, that includes getting rid of dairy, and it includes getting rid of simple carbs. And then you want to have a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. You want to have appropriate exercise, as you said, and just go right down the list, managing stress, optimizing sleep. These are things that people aren't doing. When I ask people, how much did you sleep last night? What did your wearable show for your sleep? They don't know. So you want to have at least 7 hours of sleep at night. You want to have at least an hour and a half of REM each night. You want to have at least 1 hour of deep sleep each night. And you want to have an oxygen concentration, saturation in your blood of at least 94% while you're sleeping. So many people don't have that. So this is why the brain span in America does not equal the lifespan in America. And that's something that clearly can be improved.
By the way, folks, this can all show up. I have an Oura ring on here. They're not paying me. I paid for this. But all that information Dale just mentioned comes to me every morning on this Oura ring. You can get a Fitbit. You can get an Apple Watch. But all that stuff is very easy to get your arms around to find. On exercise, it's a certain kind of exercise, is it not? Like, I've been told that the best aerobic exercise for somebody trying to stave off Alzheimer's includes at least a couple times a week interval training.
It's a great point. So there's so much now for all of these things that we know that we didn't know even just a few years ago. So as you said, this high intensity interval training has turned out to be the one that seems to be the most effective at reducing your risk for cognitive decline. But then beyond that, there are things like Katsu bands. These are restriction bands that you can put on your arms and your legs. And what they do is they actually give you more bang for your buck. Because what happens, Megyn, is you get different mechanisms. So when you do strength training, you are improving your insulin sensitivity, which is critical for your brain and critical for preventing cognitive decline of Alzheimer's disease. On the other hand, when you do the aerobic training, you are improving blood flow and oxygenation. This is one of the reasons something called EWOT is so helpful, which is exercise with oxygen therapy. EWOT gives you better blood flow and better oxygenation at the same time. So many people find this very helpful. So there's a lot of new understanding about what works the best and what are things that are available to get best outcomes in that area.
This is all in the book. You can learn more about that oxygen therapy. It sounds kind of fun to be on the treadmill with your little mask on. I'll do it if it'll help my brain. Again, the book is The Ageless Brain. Dr. Bredesen, of course, also the author of The End of Alzheimer's and many amazing, great books. Okay, so a little bit of sleep. We talked about that. A little bit of diet, exercise. Yep. Now, the detoxification of one's life is very important. It just took a nice step forward today with RFKJ banning some of the food dyes, not all of them, but he got it the first 8. It's a start. Nobody's even been paying attention to this stuff. But what are the big ones?
So the big 3 are things that are inorganics, and that would be things like air pollution, we know is a huge issue, and that's been published repeatedly as increasing risk for Alzheimer's disease. Here in California, the California fires, big issue. Also things like mercury amalgams, things like that. So those are all under the inorganics. Then the organics, and that's things like anesthetic agents. People have these long anesthetic procedures and then start to go downhill after that. So you need to detox from that. Things like benzene, toluene, glyphosate, all of those are in the organic group. And then finally, the biotoxin group. And again, this is something that hasn't even been recognized, hasn't been talked about nearly enough. There are biotoxins that we live with, things like trichothecenes and ochratoxin A. And these are things that are typically made by different mold species. And as you know, Megyn, one of the ones that's been talked about a lot lately on the organic part is microplastics. There is increasing evidence that, number one, we're all exposed to these things. They're in the air, they're in the water, they're in the food, things like that. What we know now is that they concentrate in your brain. We are all exposed to and ingesting, on average, 1 credit card worth of microplastics each week. So the increase in our exposure has been dramatic. Unfortunately,
how do we get those out of our? I mean, like you talk about air pollution and microplastics in the air. How, just like an air filter?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So air filters, things like HEPA filters for your home, very helpful. In addition, you can now undergo things like plasma exchange. Plasmapheresis will reduce this by about 70%, dramatic reductions in these. Whether you do through plasmapheresis, you can also do it through things like sauna and sweating, followed by showers with non-toxic soaps. So there are lots of ways to get at this. Increasing your glutathione level. You can take things like NAC and acetylcysteine or S-acetylglutathione, any of these sorts of things. Some people will actually go and get IVs with glutathione in them, something called the PK protocol, could be very helpful. So on and on and on. There are things that can be done. But as you said, you've got to recognize this. You've got to know that we are exposed to this. And we now know that they do concentrate in the brain more than the liver, more than the kidney. And we know that they're associated. Your level of microplastics is associated with your risk for cognitive decline. What's not clear yet is whether these are causal or simply an effect. It may be that as you're getting dementia, you allow them into your brain more. That's not been clear yet. So the concern at the moment is that these probably are part of the overall causation of risk for cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm. You got to have your house tested for mold, and not the air test, the like Swiffer test, where you let the dust build up for 2 weeks, you wipe the dust, you send the dust rag in. It's the air test is not worth the paper it's printed on. I went through this personally. We just went through a very expensive renovation of our beach home because it was riddled with mold, I learned that from the first time you came on in 2022. But I mean, now we've resolved that. Then there's Lyme disease, which a lot of people openly have. And sometimes there's like a latent form of it. You can clean that up. The point is that many people don't want to know, Doc. Like they're like, if I get it, I'm going to get it. But what you've been saying for so many years now is, there really are things you can do to stave it off. And if you would just pay attention now, before you're symptomatic or when you just maybe have a couple of symptoms, you really can potentially turn this aircraft carrier around.
Absolutely. And in fact, we're rapidly getting to a point where we are able to make sure that nobody gets this. So here's the big problem, Megyn. The current standard of care in medicine has got the biggest gap in history between what is being done with the standard of care and what is actually possible and available. You just mentioned today that you had your home renovated because it was full of mold. Who's doing that? Not very many people are doing that. There is so much that this gap is what we hope is going to be addressed by the new administration. When you hear RFK talk about peptides, about bioidentical hormones, about stem cells, about all of these things that have not been the standard of care, what's available today is far more than what is being utilized, and our health is suffering for it.
So people need to know that Dr. Bredesen does not need the money from this book. He's been doing very well. He's in high demand, but he's refreshed this book and put it out there. I mean, it's a new book, but he's refreshed his teachings from the end of Alzheimer's, and it's available right now. All this stuff is in the book. It's called The Ageless Brain. I have it. I highly, highly recommend it. It's an easy read. He writes in a way that you can consume and digest, and then it's a reference for you if you want to figure out what's a plasma exchange, what's PK protocol, all in there. And I know I speak for many when I say I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Bredesen. Thank you so much for writing the book and coming on and talking to us.
Thank you, Megyn. Great to talk to you, as always.
Oh, the one and only. I mean, everybody loves him. Dr. Mark Hyman was on. He loves Dr. Bredesen. There's like everyone else, and then there's Dr. Bredesen when it comes on to the subject of preventing Alzheimer's. The book, again, is The Ageless Brain, How to Sharpen and Protect Your Mind for a Lifetime. We're back tomorrow with Glenn Greenwald. We'll see you then.